Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and the deck text. On this episode of The Brewery, I will be discussing a new commander previewed from Throne of Eldraine, Korvold, Fae-Cursed King. Korvold is a legendary dragon noble with flying that costs 2 generic, 1 black, 1 red, and 1 green to cast. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you have to sacrifice another permanent. That may seem like a downside, but Korvold's second triggered ability gives it a +1/+1 counter, and you draw a card whenever you sacrifice a permanent. In this respect, Korvold reminds me of Mazirek, Kraul Death Priest, which gives all of your creatures a +1/+1 counter when anyone sacrifices a permanent, and Shattergang Brothers, that can sacrifice a specific card type in order to make every opponent sacrifice a permanent of the same type for just 3 mana. Korvold might seem worse than Mazirek since it only pumps itself and only when you sacrifice a permanent, but it has built-in card draw when you do, and it has access to another color which grants access to red cards to brew with. One of these being the aforementioned Shattergang Brothers. Due to the synergy, obviously these 2 cards are included in the deck. Addressing Korvold having to sacrifice another permanent when it enters the battlefield or attacks, I've included some cards that can either return to the battlefield or to your hand if it would go to the graveyard. Some great cards for precisely that are Aspect of Mongoose, Rancor, Fiery Mantle, and Glistening Oil. These auras not only serve to make Korvold even more dangerous, but if you had to sacrifice anything when attacking, you can sacrifice them since they return to your hand afterwards. Since they are so cheap to cast, you can simply recast them during your second main phase. These enchantments also work with the previously mentioned Shattergang Brothers. For 2 and a green, you can sacrifice an enchantment to make every opponent sacrifice an enchantment. And what better enchantments to sacrifice than those that return to your hand afterwards? As for a recursive creature to sacrifice, an excellent one is Reassembling Skeleton. You can just pay 1 and a black to return it to the battlefield tapped. These kinds of cards assure you always have something to sacrifice to Korvold's first ability. Another great card to sacrifice to Korvold, Shattergang Brothers, or other sacrifice outlets is Spine of Ish-Sat. Although expensive at 7 mana, it's not that unfeasible to cast it with this deck. Additionally, it destroys any permanent when it enters the battlefield, and if it were to go to a graveyard, you can send it to your hand, so it's repeatable sacrifice fodder that can destroy a permanent. Even though Korvold's first ability can be used as a situational sacrifice outlet for earning permanent besides itself, it's not efficient as a sacrifice ability per se. So, in order to sacrifice things at instant speed to draw through your deck and give Korvold +1/+1 counters, several free sacrifice outlets are included in the deck, like Ashnod's Altar, Phyrexian Altar, Greater Good, Sylvan Safekeeper, and Razaketh the Foul-Blooded. Although Razaketh is not technically free, since you have to pay life, you're able to do so without paying any mana. And it's also an amazing sacrifice outlet since you can tutor for anything in your library for just 2 life and a creature. Ashnod's Altar and Phyrexian Altar provide you with mana in exchange for sacrificing a creature, while Sylvan Safekeeper can give a creature Shroud in exchange for sacrificing a land. In response to the damage step, with enough pertinent permanents in play, you can easily one-shot an opponent with commander damage from Korvold for 0 mana. Other great sacrifice outlets include Eldrazi Monument, Elvish Reclaimer, and Garruk Relentless. Eldrazi Monument makes all of our creatures indestructible on top of giving them +1/+1 and flying. All it requires is to sacrifice a creature at the beginning of your upkeep, which is obviously no problem in this deck, and is even encouraged. Elvish Reclaimer functions similarly to Knight of the Reliquary, where you sacrifice a land in order to tutor your library for another land and put it onto the battlefield. Although there aren't many utility lands or special lands in the deck, being able to tutor for any of them while also triggering some cards in the process provides amazing synergy. Garruk Relentless is such a great planeswalker where all of its abilities are relevant in the deck, the key one being Garruk the Veil Curse -1 ability. This allows you to essentially polymorph a creature into any other creature from your library albeit going to your hand instead of the battlefield. Some other fringe sacrifice outlets are cards like Rankle, Master of Pranks. Whenever Rankle deals combat damage to a player, the ideal modes to choose are the first and last ones. You can make everyone discard a card and sacrifice a creature. This disrupts opponents while also allowing you to trigger anything that cares about creatures, or permanents, dying, and or being sacrificed. You can also sacrifice a creature with Sidisi Undead Vizier's Extort ability. While not used as a definitive sacrifice outlet, it's still synergistic to have a 4/6 Death Touch creature on the battlefield that triggered a bunch of cards on top of tutoring up any card in the library. While not sacrifice outlets themselves, there are a couple of cards that create things that have built-in sacrifice outlets. Tireless Tracker creates clue tokens with its landfall trigger. Sacrificing a clue with Korvold in play will net you 2 cards for 2 mana. During your upkeep, Awakening Zone and From Beyond each sacrifice an Eldrazi token that you can later sacrifice for 1 colorless mana. Another similar enchantment, Bitter Blossom, generates a 1/1 flying fairy rogue for 1 life during your upkeep. Although these fairies don't have a built-in sacrifice outlet, they can still be used as sacrifice fodder for Korvold, Eldrazi Monument, or other sacrifice outlets. These weak tokens can also be used as Skullclamp fodder in a bind. Other ways we can take advantage of sacrifices are with the previously mentioned Mazirek, which can give all of our creatures +1/+1 counters. This goes crazy with Korvold since it'd be getting a ton of them. Sacrificing lands triggers the Gitrog monster, which also lets you drop 2 lands per turn, which is great when you're drawing into a ton of cards thanks to both it and Korvold. Titania, Protector of Argoth, also triggers whenever a land you control is sent to the graveyard from play. Not only can she recover a land from your graveyard when she enters the battlefield, but she creates a 5/3 elemental whenever a land is sacrificed or destroyed. Deathrender synergizes amazingly well with sacrificing creatures since you can cheat a creature into play attached to it for free. You can also imprint any dying creature with Mimic Vat in order to really abuse enter the battlefield triggers or simply create a token that's a copy of an amazing creature. Marin of Clan Neltoth provides us with an experience counter every time one of our creatures dies. Then, at the end of the turn, we can either reanimate any creature in our graveyard or return it to our hand depending on its converted mana cost. Some other obnoxious and degenerate ways of abusing sacrifice abilities is with classics like Dictate of Erebos and Grave Pact. These definitely help clear the board of creatures in order to guarantee Korvold swinging in for the win. And in case opponents still manage to have blockers preventing you from defeating them with combat damage, activate Shizo, Death's Storehouse, or Rogue's Passage to get that damage through. Black Market also takes advantage of creatures dying by producing a ton of black mana during your pre-combat main phase. All this mana can be emptied into abilities like Reassembling Skeleton with Shattergang Brothers or used to fuel an epic Death Cloud. Speaking of Death Cloud, other mass Stax effects can be included since they'll hurt your opponents way more than us. So including Pox and Smallpox can go a long way with little effort. Fortunately, those aren't the only mass Stax spells in the deck. Wave of Vitriol makes all players sacrifice all non-basic lands, artifacts, and enchantments. Everyone can still replace those lands lost with basic lands from the deck, but the sacrifice triggers are insane. On the topic of mass land sacrifice, look no further than Scapeshift. Scapeshift can trigger Korvold, the Gitrog monster, Titania, and or Mazirek an insane amount of times. You can also use it to ramp for any lands you want inside of your deck. Some other cards that essentially present a trade-off between you and an opponent are Ghost Quarter, Strip Mine, and Wasteland. Sacrificing these lands trigger Korvold, the Gitrog monster, Titania, and or Mazirek, while also destroying an opponent's key land as well. Now, you might think it would be a problem with all these lands going to the graveyard. Thankfully, the deck can run both Crucible of Worlds and Ramunap Excavator. Being able to play lands from the graveyards is clutch in a deck that cares about sacrificing all kinds of permanents, since you don't lose your lands as long as no one exiles your graveyard. And if they might try that, try and have Elixir of Immortality in play with 2 mana open, in case you're facing graveyard hate. Then, you can just shuffle your graveyard into your library while gaining 5 life to boot. Sacrificing or somehow destroying Mirror Retriever and Junk Diver can help recover an artifact from the graveyard to your hand in a pinch. Their double typing means that you can use them to activate Shattergang Brothers' artifact or creature sacrifice ability. It's also important to include some cards that can destroy bothersome things the hard way, just in case you can't get rid of them with your Stax strategies. Casualties of War, Decimate, Bramble Crush, Force of Vigor, Beast Within, and Assassin's Trophy are great ways to get rid of multiple types of cards in a game of Commander. We're also losing sacrificing our own things to our Stax abilities, so we won't have much in need of protecting on the board. That being said, Sylvan Safekeeper and Eldrazi Monument shouldn't be the only sources of protection for our board. Running at least Heroic Intervention should be included in the deck. It won't do anything against Mass Bounce or Mass Exile, but at least you get Mass Indestructible and Hexproof. As can be expected, the deck might be a bit mana hungry, especially with a commander with a converted mana cost of 5. Ramp is a must, so I've included the typical Cultivate, Kodama's Reach, Skyshroud Claim, Farseek, 3 Visits, and Nature's Lore, as well as mana rocks like Arcane Signet, Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, Mox Opal, Mox Amber, and Mox Diamond, the latter of which even triggers the Gitrog monster for bonus points. In a deck like this, fetch lands serve a double purpose. Not only will they perform their namesake function, but they also trigger Korvold, the Gitrog monster, Titania, and or Mazirek. So the deck is definitely going to run all 10 fetches. Lands like Nurturing Peatland and Lotus Field also synergize well for providing mana as well as a sacrifice trigger. Since we're replaying our lands from the graveyard, you can still get value from fetches even after thinning your deck clear of all typed lands. With Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth in play, they can at least tap for black mana. Apart from those lands, the deck is running all 3 dual lands, all 3 shock lands, Ancient Tomb, Temple of the False God, Spire Garden, Luxury Suite, Command Tower, Mana Confluence, City of Brass, and Reflecting Pool, as well as 2 of each basic snow land, just in case opponents are running things that benefit us for it. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Korvold, Fae-Cursed King. Since Korvold was just spoiled a couple of hours ago, there might be new cards released in Throne of Eldraine that would make this deck even more consistent. But as far as previews go, this is definitely a fun commander to build around. You can find my current deck list for this commander down in the description. I would like to thank all my Patreons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my high tier Patreons, the Brewers, for their patronage. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am Demented Kirby, and happy brewing.